solar is becoming available to everyone. So because we have rooftop solar, we also have community solar, and we have large-scale solar. So that's the first part of it. The second part is what you're talking about is in reference to the net energy metering subsidy. And the net energy metering subsidy is very simply the failure of rooftop solar customers to fully pay for the grid services that they use. So I've written a few papers on that. That's what the net metering subsidy is. It is not transparent because if you ask people if they have a subsidy, they will say, of course I don't have a subsidy. I have net metering.
So that being said, if the subsidy is focused on the lack of equitable payment for the excess that's used, who has a responsibility for figuring that out? Where's that calculation supposed to be?
Okay, the subsidy is a result of rooftop solar customers not fully paying for grid services that they use. So that part that's not paid for is subsidized. It's basically pushed on to non-rooftop solar customers. So who's supposed to take care of that? It's who's supposed to take care of that is what we're seeing today across the country in many states where regulators are re-examining net energy metering policies because they recognize the cost shift and they recognize that it's unfair and they're trying to do something about it.
So Charlie, Lisa is using terminology like cost shift, and she's saying that there's an embedded subsidy in the way that metering is currently structured. Do you think we adequately acknowledge or properly quantify what you described in your writing as the benefits of rooftop solar? Is it really a disruptive force? Do you think some of your thinking on her view of cost shifts and subsidies?
I can't disagree with Lisa's position more. And the reason why is that the grid, which is really mostly the distribution system that we're talking about, that grid for most utilities has already been paid for. In fact, it's probably been paid for multiple times. So when we talk about the fairness of it, we have to start to raise, in my mind, the question of what are the costs of the grid that we're talking about. I wouldn't maintain a reasonable position to say you should pay nothing, bank your electricity and withdraw the electricity. But the premise ought to be that the utility is selling 1 kilowatt hour of electricity to a customer who doesn't have solar. They should get the revenue of that 1 kilowatt hour. The problem I have with most of what the utilities are saying is they also want quite a bit of revenue, maybe almost as much, for the kilowatt hour that the person who puts the solar rooftop on is using it themselves. And it's really important to understand the way the math flows back and forth. The second problem I have is that they don't stop there. They want the customer who has the solar rooftop system in place. Let's say they have 7 kilowatts of electricity on their rooftop. They want to look at that customer's maximum demand. Let's say it's 8 kilowatts. They want to charge for the 8 kilowatt use of the grid when you're only going to be using that grid with that solar rooftop in place, or maybe a kilowatt, maybe not even a kilowatt. So they're really talking about multiple charges for something that's probably already been paid for. In California, not only is the distribution system been paid for, but the California utilities are actually pre-collecting money to dismantle, replace, and rebuild the system. So customers have to pay attention to the numbers, they have to pay attention to the facts. I think when they do, we'll decide that utilities should only get 1 kilowatt hour of revenue for 1 kilowatt hour of electricity that they go out and supply. And they should get virtually nothing other than maybe a handling fee for the kilowatt hour of electricity that the customer is storing on their system and the utility is using in the meantime to supply other customers. And then in return, those customers are getting back that electricity from the utility when they decide that they may need some additional electricity.
All right, so Lisa, we really didn't build into our format sort of a rebuttal, but I hope you understand that rebuttal is welcome. But if you could do so in the context of something that, again, that I read, you described describe this generation as, quote, desirable public policy, but you warn of the unintended consequences. One of the things I need you to speak to, given your constituency, is what Senator Reed raised earlier around the current business model of the utility. How are we going to address some of the questions that you raised within our current model? So I go to the business. Is it a good fit for the growing customer needs, the choices that they're making?
Yeah, I think it's a very good fit. And what I would say is the problem, okay, the issue around net metering, and today, the net metering policies are being restructured in many states across the U.S. because regulators are concerned about cost. That policy is changing as we speak, even in Nevada as we speak. But I want to also go back to the grid. Utility industry spends about $20 billion a year on the grid. So I would say we are investing in the grid, Charlie, and I think you know how the grid works. You know that if I have rooftop solar, I import energy, I export energy, and I also have to balance supply and demand, every hour and minute of the day. Your rooftop solar system is not doing that. The grid's doing that.
I don't dispute the balancing charge. I don't dispute the transaction costs that are involved. But I did answer the moderator's question initially, which asked about benefits. And this is where I agree with benefits. When we have distributed generation that customers pay for on their rooftops, when we have that, we now see under the Clean Power Plan that hopefully gets through the courts and stays in effect. When that Clean Power Plan goes into effect, states will be able to count the renewable energy that customers pay for as part of the renewable portfolio standard. That will save, in my opinion, far more money than the additional costs that are involved in any transaction fees, any of the costs that might be involved in balancing the grid. And when we talk about the grid, we have to understand what part of the grid that we're using when we're talking about exporting and importing energy. It's more the distribution end of the system, in my mind, than the transmission end. Because centralized solar and centralized power plants use a lot more investment in terms of moving their electricity from where it's generated to where customers load happens.
So we're going to try to move into a little more of a rapid response here. Lisa, the distributed generation community and advocates are frequently told that the market can be sustained without incentives and subsidies and extra programs. Do you concur with that assessment? And Carolyn, I'm going to ask you to respond to that. And you back me.
I think what we've seen over the last 5 years is we've seen the cost of solar come way down. And I think that the subsidies that have been in place, the investment tax credit, the state subsidies, and net metering have all had a role in that. And just like we do with technologies, lots of technologies that we want to proliferate, we create subsidies. And when those costs come down far enough, when they're competitive, then we let the market take over. We're still in those subsidies, and those subsidies make sense. So I think it's been a humongous success story when we look at the declining cost of solar.
So I want to go back to the issue of subsidy and get your constituents. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think the framework is different. I think there's no question solar is increasing. There's no question that the cost of solar are coming down and the innovation is taking place. And batteries will make that, in my opinion, even more cost-effective and something we see. But the whole idea of a subsidy is when we think that the framework we should be thinking about is the utility. It's not the utility. It's the energy sector. It's the innovation that comes when people go out and do something to break away from the utility. When they go out and do something that's in their economic interest and it also has some societal benefits. When we look at the benefits, it's hard to think of this as a subsidy. And even if we were, in my opinion, we call it a subsidy, it's fully justified because the benefits far outweigh the cost of whatever those so-called subsidies might be.
On that point, I just to be clear, when we were talking about net metering and its built-in subsidy that you described, again, focused on that delta. I produce power, yes, I have a 17 kilowatt solar system on my home, so I can sit in the this. I produce the power that I don't use. We're talking about the delta. We have a regulatory regime that takes a look at that, and they make a decision as to the valuation. Are we moving toward pricing discussion that you feel is equitable?
Well, I want to address the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is not the amount of solar energy that is sold back to the grid. That's actually usually a fairly small